Taylor Swift is one of the most successful and influential artists in the world, admired for her songwriting, resilience, and ability to turn heartbreak into anthems that resonate with millions. But behind the glamour, stadium tours, and chart-topping hits, there have been moments in her personal life that left fans stunned. Throughout her career, Taylor's relationships have often become as famous as her music, sparking headlines, speculation, and even shaping the lyrics to some of her biggest songs. Over the years, a pattern has emerged. When something goes wrong in her love life, Taylor doesn't hide it, she transforms it into art. From public breakups to subtle feuds, she's given fans plenty of hints about what went wrong and what she just couldn't stand about certain partners. But among them all, there was one figure who left a particularly deep mark. The story we're about to uncover isn't just about romantic drama, it's about betrayal, miscommunication, and the struggles that even the most powerful women face in relationships. Taylor Swift may appear unstoppable today, but at one point, she was deeply hurt and couldn't stand what was happening behind the scenes. What exactly was it that drove Taylor Swift to her breaking point? What was it about him that pushed her away? And how did she turn one of the most painful chapters of her life into music that shook the world? Let's dive into the untold story of what Taylor Swift truly couldn't stand about him. When Taylor Swift first entered the relationship that would later inspire so much speculation, it seemed like the perfect match. She was a rising superstar, fresh off chart-topping albums, and he was a fellow celebrity whose career, charm, and public image made him appear like the ideal partner. On the surface, it looked like the kind of romance straight out of a Taylor Swift ballad. Two young stars finding each other in a whirlwind of fame, attention, and glamour. At first, Taylor leaned into the idea of a fairy tale. She often spoke in interviews about wanting love that was honest, supportive, and full of respect. Coming from a close-knit family and having built her career on authenticity, she valued loyalty above all else. So when she began this relationship, she thought she had finally found someone who understood her world and could stand by her side. But reality came crashing down. Behind the carefully curated photos and public smiles, cracks began to form. Taylor soon discovered that fame and charm didn't always translate into emotional maturity or reliability. What started as exciting and fresh turned into something draining and at times humiliating. The very qualities that made him seem magnetic in public, his confidence, charisma, and carefree attitude, began to clash with Taylor's values in private. What Taylor couldn't stand most was how quickly she began to feel sidelined. Instead of being treated as an equal partner, she sometimes felt like she was competing for attention. In her world, relationships required trust and balance, but she soon realized that his need for control and his unwillingness to make sacrifices were eroding the foundation they had built. Fans only saw fragments of the tension. An awkward interview here, a short-lived public appearance there, but for Taylor, the emotional weight was heavy. She had entered the romance believing in love's possibilities, only to realize she was giving far more than she was receiving. This period became the beginning of a pattern that Swifties would later recognize in her songs. Moments of vulnerability wrapped in powerful storytelling. While she rarely calls out names directly, the music spoke louder than any headline. In subtle lyrics, sharp metaphors, and heartbreaking imagery, she began to hint at the betrayal, neglect, and emotional disconnect that had left her shaken. The fairy tale had turned sour, and Taylor couldn't ignore the truth anymore. For someone who had built her identity on self-expression, holding back wasn't an option. Instead, she began preparing to do what she does best, turn pain into poetry. This was the start of a transformation. Taylor had entered the relationship full of optimism, but she would leave it stronger, wiser, and ready to remind the world that even the biggest heartbreak can become the foundation for timeless art. As the honeymoon phase faded, Taylor began to notice behaviors that chipped away at the foundation of their relationship. What seemed charming in the beginning, his confidence, his larger-than-life presence, his ability to dominate a room, soon started to feel overbearing. To Taylor, relationships were built on balance and equality, but she found herself constantly pushed into the background, as if her feelings mattered less than his ego. What she truly couldn't stand was the lack of respect. Taylor is known for being meticulous, hardworking, and dedicated, whether in her songwriting or personal life. She thrives on emotional honesty. Yet in this relationship, she often felt dismissed, as though her success and her voice weren't taken seriously. Rumors swirled that he was more concerned with appearances than substance, and that behind closed doors, he didn't put the same effort into the relationship that she did. Another source of tension was trust, or rather, the lack of it. For someone as fiercely private as Taylor, betrayal is one of the deepest wounds. Whispers of flirtations, carelessness, and questionable behavior followed him wherever he went, and Taylor was forced to live in the shadow of doubt. Whether or not all the rumors were true, the uncertainty was enough to make her feel unsafe in the relationship. She couldn't stand the feeling of constantly questioning his loyalty, of wondering if she was just another name in his list of fleeting romances. Public moments only made the situation worse. Fans recall awkward red carpet appearances, interviews where the chemistry seemed off, and even instances where Taylor looked uncomfortable. For someone who thrives on connection, those cracks were painful to hide. To the world, Taylor seemed like the picture of poise. But behind the scenes, she was confronting emotional neglect and disappointment. And then came the issue of communication, or, more accurately, the lack of it. Taylor has always been expressive, open to talking through her feelings, but he often shut down when problems arose. Instead of working through disagreements, he would retreat or dismiss her concerns, leaving her to feel unheard. Over time, this created a wall between them, one that Taylor couldn't break through no matter how much she tried. All of this added up to one devastating realization. The man she had believed could be her equal partner wasn't willing, or perhaps wasn't capable, of meeting her where she stood. What she couldn't stand wasn't just a single moment of betrayal or one bad habit. It was the repeated pattern of disregard, the erosion of trust, and the imbalance of effort. For Taylor, who has always placed immense value on authenticity and respect, this was the breaking point. And while fans didn't know all the details at the time, they began to sense something through her music. Songs filled with imagery of dishonesty, coldness, and a love that fell apart piece by piece hinted at the emotional toll she had endured. When the relationship finally collapsed, Taylor found herself facing the kind of emotional fallout that could break anyone. For a while, the pain was raw, and the disappointment ran deep. She had invested so much of herself, her time, her trust, and her hope, only to be left feeling used and disregarded. But if there's one thing Taylor Swift has mastered, it's the ability to transform heartbreak into creativity. Instead of retreating from the spotlight, Taylor poured her emotions into songwriting. Late nights with a guitar or piano became her therapy sessions, each lyric a way to process what she couldn't stand about him and the relationship as a whole. Fans didn't just get love songs. They got confessionals, glimpses into her private struggles that felt both intimate and universal. Her pen became her weapon. Taylor took the feelings of betrayal, neglect, and emotional imbalance and crafted them into tracks that resonated with millions. While she never directly named him, the details within the songs were enough for listeners to piece together a story. Every sigh, every metaphor, every carefully chosen word was a reflection of her healing process, and the music hit differently this time. It wasn't just about heartbreak, it was about reclaiming her power. Taylor's new work painted a picture of resilience. Instead of portraying herself as a victim, she emerged as someone who had learned from the pain and refused to let it define her. Audiences responded with overwhelming support, praising her honesty and the way she articulated feelings many had experienced but couldn't put into words. This was the defining difference between Taylor and many others in her position. Where some might have allowed bitterness to consume them, Taylor turned her anger and sadness into anthems. What she couldn't stand about him became the spark for some of her most memorable lyrics, and in doing so, she shifted the narrative. He might have left her wounded, but she would have the final word through her art. Her fans, Swifties, played a crucial role in this transformation. They dissected every lyric, every performance, and every clue, finding strength in Taylor's resilience. In many ways, the songs became a shared experience between Taylor and her listeners. She wasn't just singing about her own heartbreak. She was voicing the pain of anyone who had ever felt disrespected, sidelined, or unappreciated in love. The aftermath also reshaped Taylor's image in the public eye. Media outlets that once criticized her for being too open about her relationships began to recognize the artistry behind her honesty. Critics acknowledged that her vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was strength. By refusing to stay silent about what she had endured, Taylor created a body of work that solidified her as not only a pop star, but also a storyteller of her generation. What Taylor couldn't stand about him was no longer a private burden. It became a universal anthem of endurance. Through her music, she turned heartbreak into something much larger than herself, a testament to the power of expression and the resilience of the human spirit. When Taylor Swift finally walked away from that chapter of her life, she wasn't the same person who had entered it. The fairy tale beginning had given way to disillusionment. But instead of letting heartbreak define her, she used it as fuel for growth. What she couldn't stand about him, his disregard, his lack of respect, his inability to truly value her, became a set of lessons she carried into the future. For Taylor, the biggest shift was reclaiming her independence. She realized that her happiness couldn't depend on someone else's validation. While he had chipped away at her confidence, the breakup allowed her to rediscover her own strength. She poured herself into her music, her friendships, and her bond with her fans, building a support system that reminded her she was never truly alone. This new chapter wasn't just about survival, it was about evolution. Taylor began to set boundaries more firmly, not only in her personal life but also in her professional career. She demanded greater control over her artistry, fought for her rights as a songwriter, and refused to let anyone silence her voice. The lessons she learned from the relationship went beyond romance. They reinforced her determination to never again be sidelined, dismissed, or controlled. Her music also reflected this transformation. Where once she sang about heartbreak and betrayal, she now began to celebrate self-discovery, resilience, and empowerment. Albums like 1989 and Reputation carried echoes of the pain she endured, but they were also infused with triumph, signaling that she had taken back the narrative. What he had done became part of her story, but it no longer defined her. Fans noticed the difference, too. Taylor's journey inspired millions who had faced similar struggles. Her resilience proved that heartbreak could lead to strength, and that no matter how deep the wounds, healing was possible. By sharing her story through her lyrics and performances, she not only healed herself, but also created a safe space for others to process their own pain. In time, Taylor even redefined her approach to love. She became more private, more intentional, and more protective of her heart. The lessons from her past relationships, especially the one that left her so disappointed, guided her toward healthier choices. When she eventually found love again, it wasn't built on flashy appearances or shallow promises. It was grounded in trust, stability, and respect, the very qualities she had always longed for. Looking back, what Taylor Swift couldn't stand about him wasn't just a list of flaws or bad habits. It was the realization that she had been giving more than she was receiving, that she had allowed someone else's behavior to dim her light. But in overcoming that pain, she reignited her own power. At the end of the day, that difficult chapter became a turning point in her life. The heartbreak, the betrayal, and the emotional turmoil were real, but so was the growth. Taylor emerged not as a victim, but as a survivor, an artist, and a woman who knew her worth. And perhaps that is the ultimate irony. While he may have left scars, he also gave her the inspiration to create some of the most powerful music of her career. For Taylor Swift, the story of what she couldn't stand about him wasn't just about loss. It was about resilience. And that resilience has become the very heart of why she continues to inspire millions around the world.